Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Panel, Environment, Communities and Partnerships. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We've got apologies for absences. Becky?
Yes, so we have apologies from Councillors Alban and Harvey.
And I've just received a quick apology for Councillor Shaw. He'll be 5 minutes late. So moving on to the minutes, we're going to approve the minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Panel for the Environment, Communities and Partnerships that was held on the 6th of July, and also the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Panel, which was also on the 6th of July, and the 10th of August, yeah.
Is everybody happy for those minutes to be signed? We'll start here.
Yeah. So, declarations of interest. Has any members got a declaration of interest? Nope. Thank you. Then we'll move on to item 3. Notice of key executive decisions. Has everyone had a chance to look at them, and has anyone got any comments on them? No? Is everyone happy? Yes. Then we shall move on to item 4. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Sorry, do I assume the council tax issue will come to us next month? The yes, that's it. Yes, the one.
Yes, sorry. Mine seems to have decided it's not working. Yeah, that's due to come before us in November. That's scheduled for November on the notice of key decisions.
So it won't be ready in time for the October meeting.
It's got down that it's expected to come on the notice for the November meeting. Okay. That's the plan for that one.
It's just not long before cabinet. That's all.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
The earliest overview can happen, obviously, the better, the more time there is to make any adjustments.
Thank you. So, any other questions before I move on? So, moving on to the engagement principles, and we're going to have a small presentation on it. Okay.
So Michael's going to kick us off with a presentation, if you can work out how to use the microphone.
That's the one. There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Good evening, members. So the report brought forward for input this evening is around a new set of engagement principles for the council. And I'll just talk you through the short presentation on the screen. So if you could have the first slide, please. So I'll start with a bit of background to this. So the council's existing consultation engagement strategy is dated from 2014 to 2017. Back in March of this year, the council adopted a new corporate plan which outlined a commitment to listening and engaging with the local community. So these principles have been in development since the beginning of the year to align with the do, enable and influence approach within that corporate plan. So this outlines when we should inform, engage or consult and how we would go about doing that. How we would enable local people and businesses and organisations to be involved in that, and how people can support the community to influence decision making. It's important to stress that these principles draw on best practice, in particular the Consultation Institute's consultation charter, to ensure that we are aligned with best practice. Could I have the next slide, please? So when should you engage? Well, informing, engaging, consulting, and empowering are all different activities. These principles take this into consideration to enable officers to select the approach that is most relevant to their community and also their piece of work or service area. So the first question that we'd encourage people to think about is, should they engage? And the flow chart that you'll see on the next slide provides guidance around as to whether or not people should engage and what type of engagement activity should also take place. Within the appendix item, you'll also see that there's a toolkit that provides further guidance and techniques in terms of ways in which people can engage. Next slide, please. So these are the principles themselves, which consists of a flow chart to ensure that our approach to information, engagement and consultation meets the needs of the community. The key questions that we would encourage people to think about are: do you need to tell the community that a decision has been made? Can you enable people to choose between options? And how much influence can the community have over decision making and service delivery? And this flow chart will hopefully help people come to the right conclusion. Next slide, please. So at certain times, we'll need to inform the community and others will either consult or engage. So I'll start with inform. So there's many ways in which we would go about telling people what is planned. So this could be through local media and social media, along with website content. As much as I'd love everyone to follow the council's social media channels, I'm conscious that not everybody has access to those. So it's important that we consider other methods, such as using community champions or local networks to help people share some of our messaging. Next, we have consult. So local authorities have sometimes have statutory requirements to consult residents, and this is particularly true for issues such as planning. These types of issues have strict requirements around ways in which consultations should be carried out, but some of the things that we could use are questionnaires, pop-up exhibitions, focus groups, along with other items such as one-to-one interviews. Then we have deciding together. This is around something that could be achieved through co-design, and this requires stakeholders to actively be involved in the decision-making process and be seen as equal partners. So that would be through sharing knowledge, information, and other resources. Next, we have action together, and this could be carried out through co-production, which involves the community working with decision makers to design and deliver solutions. So an example of this might be running a scheme to develop loneliness champions, and they would then go out, having learnt the training, to then go into their own community and deliver that training themselves. And then finally, we've got supporting independent community initiatives. And this is essentially helping others to do what they want. And this may be done through grants and funding programs. Next slide, please. So the final thing to really mention is evaluation. So throughout any period of engagement and communication, we should monitor our activity to ensure that we're reaching our target audiences. It's through monitoring and evaluation that we'll be able to learn lessons and gain insight into the community's perceptions and aspirations, which will inform the recommendations that we'll come to. Monitoring who is and isn't participating in our engagement also enables us to understand whether we need to redesign our approach to meet the intended audiences. And there's a number of ways in which we could do that. So it could be through media and social media monitoring, or stakeholder feedback, community feedback, as well as ultimately attendance at local events and those types of things. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Has anyone got any questions? Oh, Stephen.
So let me just give some background to this as well. So I think, I mean, my view is that this is an excellent piece of work. So thank you to Michael for all the work that's gone into it. If you look at the 2014 to 2017 plan, which he mentioned in his presentations, it's basically like 2 or 3 sides of A4 with no diagrams. And I think it's a huge improvement on that. It's based on best principles from across government. And I think it's a real step forward. And I think if we'd had it in the last couple of months, it would have helped a lot with some of the deliberations we've had to make. So the reason we didn't have to bring this to overview and scrutiny, but we chose to because we wanted to have your input. So it's a draft. It's a draft proposal, and so we're hopeful that you will be able to guide us in turning it into its final form. Thank you.
Thank you. Has anyone got any questions? Councillor Crawley.
Thank you, Chair. I totally agree. It's a very good piece of work, and I found it quite illuminating and quite educational. I'm glad to see in your principal slide you've changed. I was confused on page 5. You know, how much of a role can the community play in this decision? It said none, but then we seem to have an action together. But you've changed that, so well done. Thank you. That answers all my questions. Given that it is a draft and the pedant in me as it went through it, one point I would suggest we talk about mediums. As far as I'm concerned, mediums are people who profess to talk to the dead. I'd use media because I think people will understand it better, and I'm sure we're not using we're not engaging our clairvoyant powers in one of the modes of communication. But a small point, and I just I knew it'd get a laugh, but the pedant in me just didn't like it. But I think it's a great piece of work and well done.
Thank you. Councillor Lowe.
Thank you. I was just a question really. Have you thought of all the time banks that are set up in the villages, because they are doing a lot of the sort of similar work already, especially with loneliness, and obviously Age UK. There's some great sources of volunteers there, so it might be worth having a chat with them. But no, I think it's a great piece of work. Well done.
Councillor Criswell.
Thank you. Yes, a great piece of work. It does come across, I suppose, as being quite generic. This could apply to many councils across the country. I think it would be helpful if it was a little more relevant to this particular council. And I say that because most councils are elected on a manifesto and have a mandate. This council, of course, wasn't comprised like that. And picking up on Councillor Ferguson's point about problems over the last few months with certain decisions not being consulted on, I think a little bit more humility and some mention of asking the public for permission to do things would be helpful. We had the answer, well, we didn't consult because we were going to do it anyway. Well, quite frankly, that arrogant approach means you can tear this lot up completely. So I think some reflection on the fact that actually the administration is doing its best. It's got a very wide political spectrum that it represents, but it does mean that it doesn't necessarily represent what the public voted for and wished to elect. And I don't say that to make political point scoring. It's just that, in the last couple of months, we've had discussions all across the district, most of us, I'm sure, about the green bin charge. And the thing people says was, I didn't vote for this. Well, no, of course, nobody did. So I think if this is going to reflect this council, it needs to have that little bit more humility and say, we need to ask permission to do some things because it wasn't flagged up when we were elected that that's what we were going to do. So I would like to see something reflect the makeup of this council and the particular challenges that it has in bringing the public with them. So that's just something I'd like to put in. Thank you.
So in terms of the way this was constructed, is of course it is generic in nature because we've tried to adopt the best practice from across local government. But I think Michael's put a real effort into tailoring it to HDC specifically. I don't agree with your point about manifestos, and I have no real desire to reopen that debate again. But as Councillor Fuller might have said, I'll follow your lead politically. We have a government in this country, who are not sticking to the manifesto commitments. It's difficult. I'm part of a representative democracy, and what I'm elected for is to take difficult decisions based on the information that's available at the time, and I cannot predict at the start of a 4-year period or even at the start of a 2-year period all that's going to happen. So I think that the flowchart is very clear about when we need to consult. I didn't say this in my intro, but there's a set of principles called the gunning principles, which are very well reflected in this flowchart, which say that you cannot consult unless there are options on the table. We've had this debate already, and I don't really care to reopen it. But I think had we had this flowchart when those discussions were going on, I think it would have been very, very clear that it defines our course of action, which is not the point of it, because this piece of work predates all of those discussions. And I'll just make the point, because we're getting political. When the previous administration made the car parking changes and doubled the price of car parking in places like St Neots, you didn't even inform the press. You stuck it on lampposts, and I saw it because I saw it on the sign outside a car park. So at least we're being open and honest, and we're saying how we're going to engage. And so it's a big step forward. So principles are principles, and you need to have the same principles in opposition as you do in administration. Thank you.
Would you like to respond to that, or?
Well, only to say that Councillor Ferguson obviously doesn't want to take my points on board, so that's up to him. Thank you.
Can I just clarify, Councillor Criswell? So what are you saying, that the principle should include? Because for me, this
an element
reads
of
as a document.
asking the public for permission to do certain things that will have come as a surprise. Whatever councils have done in the past isn't part of this. You've asked me to comment on this, and that's what I'm commenting on.
Okay. The way I'm reading this is it's a template about how to do engagement rather than a reflection on what you're saying. I'm just a bit I'm just trying to understand what you're saying.
A large part of it is when to engage, and I suppose that's the point that I make.
Thank you. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you very much, and thank you for a lovely presentation. I think the flow chart makes it quite nice and clear, the process of decision making. You mentioned local champions in the report. Is there the only thing I'd perhaps like to see something a bit more specific in that respect, perhaps, for example, warm spaces. A councillor made a suggestion, I'm afraid I can't remember what it was you said, but maybe food banks and perhaps have a list of consultees, if you like, perhaps. But other than that, very clear and very good. Thank you.
Any other comments? Thank you, Councillor.
Cool. Again, to start, I think brilliant piece of work. Thank you very much for it. You mentioned earlier about engaging with kind of groups of people who are harder to engage normally. Do we have a kind of strategy for engaging with specific groups like young people who it's normally quite hard to reach out to?
So I think it also builds on the points of Councillor Lowe and Councillor Shaw. So through a lot of the work that we did through the play strategy last year, we have got an awful long list of different community groups and organisations that we're aware of within Huntingdonshire. And I think that as pieces of engagement come forward, it would be a case of making those lists and raising awareness of those groups to specific officers that would be looking to carry out a piece of engagement. So we are aware of where a lot of those groups are. It's just a case of reaching out to them.
I think that's an excellent point, actually, and one I had noticed. I think Councillor Bywater and Councillor Lowe and I both all on the Police and Crime Commissioners panel, and every year he does a precept survey, and you look at the responses to those, and they're largely from white men who are over 65 years of age, and we point out every year, and I think the Police and Crime Commissioner tries really, really hard to engage with those difficult to reach groups who are difficult to reach by definition. But I think it's something that we should always be monitoring in response to these things, because we need to hear from the whole community and not just people like me.
No, I completely understand the struggles. I mean, as a young person, it's trying to convince my peers to engage in local politics is difficult at times, impossible the others. Try to think, you mentioned kind of keeping community groups kind of lists of that's really good. Have we also considered like compiling best practice as we go and kind of monitoring statistics as we go to see if there's improvements?
Yeah, I think a key part of this is around the evaluation that we do once a piece of engagement's been carried out. It's through doing the piece of work that you discover what's worked well and what hasn't. And within the toolkit, there's a few case studies and examples of the climate strategy work that's taken place, the Huntingdonshire Futures Play strategy, to give officers examples of engagement activities that has been carried out and some of the lessons that's been learnt by carrying out those engagement exercises.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you, Michael and Councillor Ferguson. I thought it was an amazing report, and I shall be stealing it for our town council.
As long as you give Michael a name check, thank you.
Thank you. Now, we are now looking to do recommendations. So, have we got any recommendations?
The recommendation is that they were commenting.
Yeah,
on
just the
reports, so
comments. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So, are we happy with the recommendations we're giving?
The comments.
The comments that we'll pass on. Yeah. We commented. Yeah, they'll be passed on. Thank you. So, we are now moving on to item 5, our overview and scrutiny working programme. Has anybody got anything they want to discuss about the programme or questions to ask about it, comments to make?
Yes, I'm sorry, and I'm like a stuck record, but we really need to develop a better work program than this. I mean, we've all come here this evening. We've finished at 7:20. You know, years ago we just struggled to get fit things on agendas. We had 4 or 5 substantial items every meeting, and we need to go out and seek things. It's over a year ago I asked if we could talk about GP waiting times. We now know Hinchinbrook's got problems with its concrete. You know, let's get them in and find out what the implications are and how that could affect patient care. You know, there's lots of opportunities to do scrutiny, and I'm sorry, Julie, but part of your job as chair is to go out and find those things and get a nice long list ahead of us for things that we can scrutinise. And time after time, we've got one small item on the agenda.
Well, I'm happy and open here for us to throw ideas in. That's what we can do as a panel here. And if you've got ideas, we can ask.
I've mentioned a couple.
Can you make a note of them? Has anyone else? Yes, Councillor Lowe.
Thank you. I was just thinking the lack of NHS dentists. That's quite a big one. And to look into the hydrogen vehicles as well, because I know BP is going forward with that, as our Toyota. It might be quite a good thing. We've looked at the EV charging. I think it's worth looking at, all alternative resources or sources. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bywater.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just quickly, it's not on here. I know we've mentioned in the past about the bin situation coming back to us, whether it's going to be put on here. So it's in the pipeline, and ultimately active land management and the outcomes of that. So it should be on here. We've discussed it. It should be on here.
Sorry, I was just going to say I can add that on the green bin issue and the involvement of ONS within that was discussed last night as well. So that is going to be added on going forward. And then I'm in discussions as to how we can bring that together for a joint working group on that one. And certainly the land management is due to come back as well.
Yes, we were discussing the land management in our briefing, and I'm keen to get that one brought forward and us to have a real good look at that. Thank you, Councillor Lowe.
Just thought of another, with regards to planning, I know it's planning, but the environmental side of things, we really should be encouraging or legislating to developers to put solar PV and solar thermal panels on all properties, and to get more green spaces, because I think there's an awful lot of concrete around, and I think it would be good, especially with having announced the climate crisis. I think it would be a very good idea to look into that as well, maybe help, because I know obviously the local plan's being redone, whether that's something that we could look at the environmental side of things to help with that process. I don't know, but
Thank you, Chair. At the next meeting, I do intend to bring a piece back on what is termed financial vulnerability, but as I will go through in committee, and I think it will be a weighty item, Councillor, a meaty one. A lot of those financial vulnerability issues are being addressed as we plan through a wider determinant of health focus. So we will touch on health at the next meeting, certainly. It's completely, of course, in the gift of the committee. If it wants to talk to the integrated care system about GP access and things like that, and we do talk to them regularly. As I will attempt to point out at the next meeting, that is not where we can make the most impact on the health of the population of Huntingdonshire. But I'll leave that trailer there and come back to the next meeting. We can certainly talk to ICS colleagues, and we can get, of course, the data is available. But in terms of what we try and address and what we're trying to do in partnership, I think we'll cover some of that hopefully in the next meeting.
So, Crawley.
Thank you, Chair. So I understand from the environmental side, there's only going to be a report on KPIs once a year, which I totally understand why. But I understand also as a sort of quarterly update happens in the background, it might be useful if this panel could see some of that, so we could just see how progress is being made, not necessarily against the KPIs, but on various initiatives and what's happening there. And there's something else that's now gone out of my head completely. Oh yes, I know. Given we've just looked at the engagement principles, I'd like us to have explore how we as a council can more engage with our parish councils in areas where necessarily we don't have to. An example that's come up in my ward recently through a licensing issue, we don't have a regulatory requirement to consult or to inform, apparently. And I know that my parish council in Grafton were very upset that for various reasons that they didn't get ahead of the game there. I think it would be incumbent on us to think about how do we just make sure we do proactively engage with our parish councils more on these sorts of things that we don't have a regulatory reason to do, but it would be good, again, if we want to live by our principles that we're pretty much just agreed on. So I think that'd be something worth exploring as well.
Thank you. We're just looking for items that we can add to the working programme. Councillor Hunt.
But can I add, building on the points made by Councillor Bywater and Councillor Corley, a practical one. When we have someone agree to come back to us, would we be able to record that on the tracker so we're aware? Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Has anyone got any other comments on our working programme? Yeah, Councillor Hunt.
Just pops into my head again. I know it was floated earlier in the year, the possibility of a site visit to the Great Fen project and possibly a talk there. Do we know if that's something we'd be able to look into?
That's working good. What I'm looking into is for them to come here to see it, with then an opportunity for a visit for those who would like to, because obviously I think the original suggestion was for a meeting there, which wouldn't necessarily be practical given that we couldn't then stream on YouTube, etc. So we're looking for them to come here to do a presentation and then obviously work it that way.
Any other comments and questions on the working programme? In that case, that's the end of our meeting. So thank you so much for your attendance and your comments.